Horror as a concept has been around for a long time, potentially all of human history. The beauty of horror is how we as individuals can find so many different things scary on so many different levels. This means that horror is extremely adaptable and can always evolve. If you look at the top 20 grossing horror films of all time, half of them are from recent years. The most profitable horror series is the Conjuring universe, and all but 2 of those films were made in the past 9 years. I wanted to take a look at how different pieces of media use horror to tell or enhance some amazing stories. I won't be going into too much detail though, as each example I give could be turned into its own video. But for now, let's begin with what I believe started the modern evolution of horror. Un Chien Andalou came out during a time where horror was a lot more simple. A werewolf, ghoul or vampire doing something scary to an unsuspecting victim. It set out to take a new approach to horror by disturbing the audience on a whole nother level. So disturbing, in fact, Louis Buñuel, the director and co-creator of the film, kept rocks in his pockets during the opening night just in case the audience started attacking him. The film contained visuals such as a razor blade cutting open an eye, insects crawling out of a flesh wound, a woman being run over because she couldn't move from the spot she found a severed hand, armpit hair. Compared to now, this is nothing, but during the 1920s, this was something very new and very disturbing. Though you have an idea of what you're seeing in the moment, the reasoning, connection, and narrative for these events are purposefully non-existent. This type of horror was meant to use the confusion created through narrative to enhance the disturbing nature of the visuals. Some good examples of future films adapting this concept actually came from children's films. The scene from Pinocchio where the children begin turning into donkeys, the sequences with Satan at the end of The Adventures of Mark Twain, or the many gruesome deaths of Watership Down. A common theme here would be taking something innocent or comfortable and twisting it in a nightmarish way to catch the audience off guard. A lot of mainstream horror films at the time focused on gore or jump scares, but that uncomfortable feeling you got from the pacing still holds up to this day. Jump scares are still used a lot in modern media. They create a similar flight or fight response in the body, but the reaction is purely physical and the payoff is instant as the adrenaline leaves your body almost immediately. The moments that stick with you are the ones that invoke a tense atmosphere, have good pacing and create strong imagery to leave a long-lasting emotional effect on you.
How do you know about that? Aren't you hungry?
We view this story through the eyes of James Sunderland, a man who enters Silent Hill after receiving a letter from his deceased wife Mary, telling him to meet her at their special place. Instantly we get the sense that James isn't a reliable narrator, as not only are we told by James himself his wife has been dead for a while, nothing is revealed until the very end of the game, but throughout we're constantly questioning James's sanity. When meeting other characters, we realise their mental state and or problems could be a reflection of James. It's also heavily implied these characters are experiencing a different version of the town. All the information we learn whilst interacting with other people only makes James's perspective less trustworthy. Adding to the confusion is Maria, a woman physically identical to Mary, only her personality is more flirtatious, her clothes more revealing, and she's alive. No one outside of James interacts with Maria, and she seems to be experiencing the same version of the town as us. Whether you believe Maria is real or not, her existence contradicts the things we learn from the other characters. Adding to the unease is the gameplay. Like many PlayStation 1 horror protagonists, James controls like a tank. However, Silent Hill uses tank controls to its advantage, as it's there to make you feel helpless. Movement is stiff, James overswings his melee attacks, and reloading guns feels like an eternity. James isn't a trained soldier or a superhuman, he's a regular dude. With limited supplies like healing and ammo, every encounter in this game needs to be thought through very carefully. The enemies you encounter in this game are all different reflections of James, Mary, or their experiences whilst Mary was in hospital. A lot of the time you'll either encounter them in claustrophobic hallways, or be attacked by many of them at once. Forgive me for skimming the details, but talking about how amazing Silent Hill 2 is could take an entire video. One enemy I want to focus on though is the Pyramid Head. You meet him fairly early on in your adventure, and though he isn't a stalker enemy in gameplay, the way he's used narratively definitely inspired many stalker enemies after him. Walking down a tight corridor, you see him, standing there, menacingly. Behind some steel beams he's not able to attack you, but you can't attack him either. He just stands and watches. You have no idea what he wants, but the static coming from the radio means it can't be good. After leaving the room with the dead body, Pyramid Head has disappeared, potentially looking for a way to get to us. What makes the Pyramid Head encounter so memorable is the lack of a jump scare. They could have easily made a loud noise or a cutscene with a jump scare, but they chose to make him mysterious, leading us to questioning what he is, what he wants, and where he's gone. Silent Hill 2 creates events with no explanation to constantly make us question things. The lack of knowledge not only makes the horror scarier, but messes with us psychologically as we don't know what to believe or what to expect.
That's some bullshit.
My only experience with Corpse Party is watching other people play it whilst talking about PewDiePie playing it. The series itself has several manga, 2 live-action movies, and 12 games, each with more and more questionable concepts added. The first Corpse Party game went on to inspire the RPG Maker horror series that we see during the early days of YouTube. Released in 1996, it was created for the Japanese login Softcom Game Jam, which itself was created to advertise Dante, the name of the original RPG Maker. Instead of being a turn-based RPG game though, Corpse Party was a survival horror game containing puzzles to continue the story and decide which of the multiple endings you got, focusing more on the characters, narrative and fear factor. Though minimalistic due to the nature of game jams, it would go on to win second place and gain enough popularity for sequels. Each game after would refine the features of the original. It set the framework which would go on to inspire games like Ao-Oni, Mad Father, The Witch's House, etc. A game that is usually credited for popularizing the genre though is Yume Nikki. Yume Nikki, or Dream Journal, could be compared to LSD Simulator in the way that it feels more like an interactable piece of art rather than a stereotypical adventure game. The game is so surreal and non-linear that every individual can come up with their own interpretation of what's happening. The focus is on the adventure you take, as there's never an explanation as to where to go, what to do, or what's happening. The only thing you know is that Madatsuki refuses to leave her room, so the game takes place in her many dream worlds as you explore each one, collecting different effects. Effects are items that can be used to venture further within the dreams, find secret interactions with NPCs, or are just cosmetics for Madatsuki. In the Nexus, you are able to travel through 12 different dreams. Within these dreams, you can find hidden entrances to even more dreams. Though not a horror game, some of these sequences can create atmospheres that can really unease or unnerve you, whilst others can just scare you. These kinds of games had a huge effect on gaming and YouTube, especially during the early 2010s, as they were simple but entertaining to play and to watch. Because of their scary nature, it was easy to hit record and just play, as many sadistic people just wanted to watch a grown man scream like a baby. Another aspect of early horror Let's Plays were the FPS horror games. Many people didn't want to dedicate their time to watching lore-heavy Let's Plays, so a lot of the entertainment in FPS horror came from people getting scared more frequently whilst keeping the same atmosphere. Amnesia, Slender and Five Nights at Freddy's are names everybody knows. Though all receive similar scores from reviewers and views on YouTube, these games are very different in their gameplay and the way they tell their stories. Amnesia was a bit more lengthy because of its narrative, but it used its narrative and cutscenes to enhance the atmosphere and the tension of the gameplay. Slender and FNAF originally didn't have much of an in-game story, as it just wanted to focus on the scares. Slender is a walking simulator where you need to avoid dying to the Slender Man, collect all 8 pages, and die to the Slender Man. Stalker enemies weren't a new thing at this point, but the randomness of Slender's appearances created a lot more tension whilst playing the game. The Slender Man was created by Victor Surge on the Something Awful forums, in a supernatural Photoshop edits contest. The pictures would garner so much attention, people would begin making their own interpretations of the creature, giving it new forms, abilities, and lore. This was done before the game was even created. Five Nights at Freddy's had a slightly different creation process, as whilst making other games, the creator was told that their models looked like creepy animatronics. So they created a horror game with creepy animatronics. What made FNAF stand out from other horror games was the fact you couldn't move your character to escape the horrors. You were stuck in a small room, needing to use the camera system to watch the animatronics' movement, locking doors to prevent them from entering. Though you would get recorded messages at the beginning of each night, a lot of the lore expansions came from the fans and their discussions outside of the games. The popularity created from this led to more games and more lore about the series. It's even a reason MatPat is famous. Though I didn't like any of these games or the many mascot horrors that came after, it's interesting to see this almost ARG-like interaction creating and expanding upon stories. These trends mixed with the success of psychological and story-based horrors would influence and inspire a lot of game makers after this. A great example of this influence can be seen in Fear and Hunger. Before starting your run of Fear and Hunger, the only information given is a quick backstory of your character and your reason for entering the dungeon, to find the guard before he's executed. How you approach your journey is up to you. Fear and Hunger is a cruel and unforgiving game, and you learn this very quickly. If you aren't fast enough in the beginning, you'll be jumped by bloodthirsty dogs who will end your run instantly. However, even if you are to escape, you'll find yourself wandering aimlessly through an ever-changing nightmarish dungeon, whilst being hunted by grotesque and otherworldly monsters. Fear and Hunger is an evolution to the RPG Maker horror style, combining the overworld interactions and scares with a twist on traditional RPG combat. There is no leveling up in this game, meaning battles will lead to you gaining nothing or just ending your run. The experience you gain from each encounter, each event, and each run is knowledge. Finding weaknesses, developing strategies, and gaining companions. You don't know what will happen until it happens, but each playthrough will prepare you just that little bit more. A unique aspect to this game is its combat. Both you and your enemies have different limbs that have different abilities. Cutting these limbs off can deal more damage, stagger your foes, or decrease attributes like defense or evasion. Enemies are not only able to use multiple limbs to attack, but can cut yours off as well. The only way to get them back is to have consensual sex or sacrifice a child. You know, the usual stuff. Similar to Silent Hill, the combat in this game is used to make you feel vulnerable at all times. Even with the best gear, speed increases, and multiple party members, one good slash at your eyes can end everything instantly. Combat is a big part of this game, but so are the overworld interactions. There are many ways to make your encounters easier or just to avoid them. However, items, food, and crafting materials can be very scarce and very random. You'll also need to keep a check on the Fear and Hunger system. The dungeon itself starves you faster than normal, whilst it and the horrors you find will drain your sanity. If these aren't kept in check for you and your party, some bad things can happen. Adding to this is the Crow Mauler, a stalker enemy and a direct reference to the Pyramid Head. After his similar introduction, he will begin to randomly appear throughout your adventure, ending your run if you're ill-prepared. The Crow Mauler won't always spawn near you though. There's a chance he can spawn on the other side of the map. However, not only do you still have to deal with the other horrors of the dungeon, but you know the Crow Mauler is closing in, constantly adding more anxiety to already tense situations. There's a chance you may go an entire run without him even spawning, but once you know what he can do, you can never feel safe. After content creators got their grimy hands on the game, a lot more people began to play it. Exploring the dungeons and reading the lore-filled text would lead to more and more videos being made about the story of Fear and Hunger. This popularity would lead to a sequel being made. The old style of RPG Maker horror would slowly begin to die out as it was becoming stale and repetitive. Fear and Hunger would evolve this system to set itself apart from other games in general, but other RPG horrors would go a different route, using more traditional RPG gameplay whilst telling more mature stories with darker and relatable themes. Though censored for Western releases, Mother and Earthbound covered mature themes not usually seen in video games at the time: mental health, abuse, death, and more. The Mother series definitely inspired many RPG games through its visuals, narrative, and gameplay, though I personally believe it's the interactions and the depth of Mother 3 that would take this inspiration to a whole new level. Mother 3 is not a horror game. It's an experience, with unique characters, a world full of personality, mature themes, a heart-wrenching story, and little details that prove to you how much love went into this game. From as early as the name entry screen, you build a connection with these characters. Each interaction tells you a story through the extremely expressive pixel art animations. Throughout the chapters, we're able to interact with the different inhabitants of Tazmily Village, seeing their reactions to the story events and their own journeys throughout the game, each having a unique personality and relationships with other villagers. Even the enemies you fight interact with you in different ways, or other enemies depending on the circumstances of battle. However, we also experience loss, Hinawa, Klaus, the Mad Gypsies, a simple way of life, and potentially the whole world. Though we don't get to build a close connection with every character, we still feel sympathy through the characters we did get to build that connection with. Which is why, during the final fight with Klaus, it really affects you. Seeing the monster Klaus was forced into becoming, Flint risking his life to save Lucas and try stopping the fight, and especially when Hinawa's ghost appears to tell Klaus, "You must be exhausted." It doesn't just affect you, it breaks you. Earthbound would inspire the themes and atmosphere. Mother 3 would inspire the connections and experiences. I think two great examples that take from these games are Lisa the Painful and Omori. Taking place in a post-apocalyptic world with no women, we follow the story of Brad Armstrong and his journey to save his adopted daughter Buddy, humanity's last hope for repopulation, and Brad's last hope to make up for not standing against his abusive father, leading to the death of his little sister Lisa. The main story is rather simple, but through character interactions and hidden information, we learn more about the world itself. However, a lot of this information only makes us ask more questions. We learn about Brad through his hallucination-like flashbacks. These hallucinations are normally short enough that they don't take away from the gameplay, but they give enough information to be interesting, whilst keeping that eerie atmosphere. Combine these with the actual hallucinations Brad experiences and his problematic mindset, we begin to question if Brad is a reliable narrator. Lisa the Painful fills its world with personality, through the story, the characters, the anxiety-inducing locations, or the hidden treasures and encounters. The lack of information about the world mixed with these interactions adds to the want for exploration in this game. Throughout the adventure, we interact and see the ways that people live through this depressing setting. Some accept it, others move on, and some refuse to be depressed by it. You can become a pro wrestler, take part in kart racing, enter a Saturday morning cartoon, or just learn martial arts. It almost doesn't feel as if Lisa is a horror game, until it reminds you that it is. Area 1 feels creepy, the atmosphere is set, you encounter a few weird creatures, but it's not until you enter Wally's that you realise how unsettling this game can become. Entering what feels like a holy land filled with devout followers to a gracious deity, blessing them with one fast food meal a day, you slowly make your way up to the fast food mascot. Each step you take only makes his sinister laughs become louder and louder. He initiates a battle with his intruders. The more damage you deal, the more his mask cracks, revealing a fleshy texture similar to the meat found in the restaurant. Accompanied by an eerie piece of music and an ear-shattering cackle, this is one of the scariest encounters so far. Wally himself having more health than most boss fights, you're meant to be here for a long time. This battle is also mandatory to continue, and after some story events, Brad's hallucinations become more frequent, more intense, but less real. The further you venture through the world, the more you encounter its horrors. The story begins to get more serious. You're more likely to lose party members, you encounter more and tougher joy mutants, and everything gets bleaker. Each element constantly reinforces the effect the others have on us, until it comes to an end and we lose everything. You can place Omori's horrors into two main categories, conventional and primal. A conventional horror would be something we all find scary, something that uses the moment to induce fear into you, not necessarily lasting a long period of time, but long enough that it affects your next choice. Your friend's eyes glowing red as a black void surrounds them, or a familiar voice calling you from the other side of the door, only to reveal the mangled corpse of your dead sister. Primal fear is something that sticks with you for a long time, even when you're done playing the game. In the middle of the night you need the toilet. Your only light source, the moon rays creeping through the small gaps in your blinds. Entering the bathroom you look at your reflection, only to see something otherworldly peeking through your doorframe. You're hungry. Heading down the staircase, dread quickly looms over you. A tingly sensation shoots through your body, like hands wriggling from the dark trying to grasp at you. But then, you sense something chasing you. As the stairs get longer, the hands get closer and closer until an eerie smile creeps out from the darkness, taunting your cowardice. You can't run. You can't fight. You are afraid. Maybe this scene didn't affect you as much as it did me, but it certainly reminded me of a childhood feeling. Like the food reviewer from Ratatouille, but instead of the warmth of mum's cooking, I felt the warmth of me wetting myself. I'm not trying to say that the more conventional scares in Omori aren't well done. I think they're used perfectly, either scattered amidst moments of calm to remind you what kind of game you're playing, or used to help impact the effect the more primal scares have on us. Music, sound effects, environments. When used to create a tense atmosphere, Omori hits the nail on the head every time, especially in the moments of isolation. In Omori, you travel through this dream world with 3 friends, fighting cute creatures in an RPG style reminiscent of Earthbound. During your search for your friend Basil, you'll conquer your fear of heights to head to the moon. After helping Captain Spaceboy, you follow bloody tracks that only you seem to notice. Following a shadowy figure that looks like Basil off screen, your friends disappear. Following this figure further leads to a barn previously locked. Entering a painting Mario 64 style, you find yourself travelling down a long hallway reminiscent of the staircase. After collecting the hangman letter and checking the other painting, you begin to head back, only for that otherworldly creature to appear again and chase you. You cannot escape. The individual elements of Omori aren't anything that will give you nightmares, but when these little snippets creep up on you, slowly but consistently building the tension, that's when it begins to affect you. And that's where Omori is at its best, horror-wise. Is there a payoff or not? Will I look into the mirror and see that thing again? Am I actually safe? What happens if I lose the hangman? What happens if I win? Sharing experiences with friends or loved ones can be the most fulfilling moments in life, so why not shit your pants together as well? With games like GTFO, Phasmophobia, and Lethal Company, you're able to create your own experiences and stories with your friends.
One person stays there. No!
Run! Twitch's platform expanded the idea of sharing content that YouTube started, so gaming evolved alongside this, being able to not only play games together but to create new experiences each time with the concept of random encounters and more control and interactiveness that previous horror games didn't have. Some of these co-op games focus on the atmosphere, some on the horrors, and others found a middle ground. Even though what you can experience is set in stone, the RNG of these encounters has definitely allowed horror to expand what it can do in video games. Another side to modern horror are games like Chiller's Art, adapting the concepts of the early indie horror games but enclosing them into smaller environments and stories, using different gameplay genres to affect your experiences with the same horror ideas. John Arbuckle wakes in the middle of the night to a strange noise. Turning on his bedside light, he notices his walls and furniture are tinted orange and all have this strange but familiar black pattern on them. Walking downstairs to the living room, he appears frightened to the horror he has laid his eyes upon. "I'm sorry, John." We see Garfield has morphed into the whole house. "I was so hungry." Made by Double Baby in 2013, this short comic alongside others like Garfold and Gramfell would depict Garfield in its stereotypical nihilistic way, but set to some kind of extreme, with a sprinkle of horror added to it. In 2018, Will Burke would take this version of Garfield to a whole nother level, creating multiple horror-centric drawings dubbed Gorefield, each with a Dark Souls-like feel both in scale and style. These grotesque versions of Garfield all sharing one key element: they were all hunting down John Arbuckle. Later, artist Lumpy Touch would create a whole new story for these images in the form of a fake video game animation. Because of this, the popularity of Gorefield would rise in the form of the subreddit r/I'mSorryJohn. Artists from all over the world would come together to create their own interpretations of Gorefield. The main styles followed would be existential horror, Lovecraftian horror, and cosmic horror. Similar to Will Burke's drawings, the key elements they would all share would be their need to hunt or torment John Arbuckle. Still very active to this day, the depictions of Gorefield are ever evolving. Demonic or ethereal incarnations of the cat are the current focus. Some have even returned to the parody routes that inspired Gramfell. Blorkits is an animator whose focus seems to be on animated Garfield horror parodies. and they seem to get quite a lot of views on these videos. The need for Garfield is astounding. Fun fact, whilst looking for their Tokyo Ghoul parody, I got recommended an acoustic cover of the theme by a channel named Garfield. Reality itself revolves around Garfield. Plushies, phones, bird baths, tote bags, animated parodies, school films, horror games. Garfield is inescapable. The only limitations to creating a good story are your imagination and drive. Some of the examples I've talked about would be great without horror, some would be lackluster, and some wouldn't exist. The point of this video was to show off how different mediums use horror as a tool to enhance their stories or your experience of these stories. We've come a long way from the days of horror being nothing but a cheap jump scare. All I have left to say is thank you for watching, and go make stuff. You won't regret it.